Coming up on this episode of Nintendo Cartridge Society, they're not all Hello Kitty cruisers. It's dangerous to go alone, so the Nintendo Cartridge Society goes with you. Welcome to Nintendo Cartridge Society. My name is Patrick Ellers, and I am joined, as I'm always joined by my co-host, Mark Mitchell. Mark, how's it going?
It's going, I think, well. I've got to be honest, we're recording this on Saturday, so I don't actually know how I'm going to be doing on Thursday, but I'm going to say I'm doing great.
Yeah, I mean, we're doing a little bit of a time capsule episode here, kind of because Tuesday and Wednesday are or have been monumentous occasions in American history and electoral politics. So we are just we're knocking this one out of the way, so you have something fun to listen to today, and that we don't have to prepare it. Well, maybe not being in a super fun mood. Who knows? But yeah, no, we're going to be talking about licensed games today. But before we dive into that, as you now know, the Sonic Forces borrowing program has returned. It has never actually gone away, and you can always write in to Nintendo Cartridge Society at gmail.com and give us a mailing address, and we will send you my copy of Sonic Forces. We are reinstating this now with the spoiler of you may accidentally get the Untitled Goose Game instead of Sonic Forces. The Goose is a trickster. He can't be stopped. I'm sorry. / congratulations, you got the better game.
But the rules still apply. The same rules for Untitled Goose Game apply as to those for Sonic Forces, which is, of course, no rule other than you have to return it at some point.
You play it for as long as you want, and then you send it back to me. We've provided return postage, so it doesn't cost you anything. And look, and no matter what, even if you get Untitled Goose Game, this is still the Sonic Forces borrowing program. That's its name. And I don't want to hear anyone messing it up, okay? It's the Sonic Forces borrowing program.
And one other thing is just no requesting one game over the other.
That's right. Look, all you're doing is putting your name in to borrow one of my games. And everyone means to borrow Sonic Forces. If you accidentally end up borrowing Untitled Goose Game, that's just the luck of the goose, man. That's just what it is. All right, Mark, no more screwing around. Let's get into our main topic. Let's discuss licensed games. All right, Mark, why this is your topic idea. I'm throwing you under the bus right away. Why are we talking about licensed games today?
Well, of course, on Tuesday, Bakugan Champions of Vestroia was released for Nintendo Switch. And if you'll recall the reveal of this game, Nintendo did their first live stream Nintendo Treehouse Live of 2020. And it was for Paper Mario The Origami King. And then in the announcement, they were also like, by the way, we're going to be announcing a new third-party title. And of course, that sent the internet ablaze, wondering what it could be, super excited. And the answer turned out to be Bakugan Champions of Vestroia, which is a licensed game being developed by WayForward that's based on a toy line and animated series, I believe.
Yeah, and, being, high 30-year-olds, upper 30-year-old men, the Bakugan series is something that missed us all, I would say, entirely. And so I could feel a lot of like the air come out of like our peers, just like everyone kind of being deflated at that point and turning off the Nintendo Treehouse presentation.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of the reason I want to do this is because I think that like licensed titles in general have like a bad reputation as just like cheap, cash grabs that are usually aimed at children based on like animated movies and stuff. But I don't know that that's really like a fair reputation. Granted, a lot of the games I'm going to be talking about are probably in that category, but like like there's a lot of like good licensed games that you don't really consider them licensed. Like when there's a new Star Wars game or a new Marvel game, or
Yeah.
like a bunch of other things, like you don't really put um Hello Kitty Cruisers and Marvel versus Capcom in like the same category, even though they are both licensed games.
Yeah, I mean, and that is 100% correct. That like, it, and really like, it is so strange because there is certainly this like mentality of like, this is probably the best licensed game. Whatever, like there's always like a little like couching of like we expect a licensed game to be bad, but like there are just a lot of bad games, licensed or otherwise, right? So like, yeah, I don't know that whether it's based on an existing movie or cartoon or whatever, if that necessarily is any indication of its quality, especially now when we're seeing the kinds of stuff that we're seeing out of like WB games. Like the this is a little bit off the Nintendo path, a little, but like the Injustice games or the Shadow of War, the Middle Earth games, like those are all licensed games, but or they have actually, that's interesting, are those licensed because they're developed by WB?
Yeah, I guess probably in this age of, like conglomeration, that no, technically they're probably not licensed because, you know,
Yeah.
Rocksteady is owned by Warner Brothers, who owns the Batman IP. So in that instance, probably no.
Then wow. Okay, so one of the things I was going to throw out there was, in fact, the Batman Arkham City Armored Edition on the Nintendo Wii U, which was just Arkham City ported over to the Wii U, like 5 years later, and with very minimal like upgrades and additions to it. And I mostly want to talk about that because of like my memory of playing Batman games on Nintendo consoles. Like I played the original NES Batman, and based on the '89 Batman film, and that game was like fun and kind of like Ninja Gaiden-y, but had like Batman specifics to it. Um, but yeah, it's I guess we can't even count that one now because it was developed by a company that is owned by WB, not licensed.
Yeah, I think technically that's true, which is
Mark,
the
you're
worst
blowing
kind
my
of
mind a
true.
little bit. Yeah. You're blowing my mind a little bit.
Well, before we get into like the games that we like a lot, and I do want to talk about, for me anyways, there was like in the Super Nintendo era, there was a really specific type of licensed game that I don't really think exists anymore, and it was all based on like food mascots or like TV, like things based on like TV commercials, and
Sure.
that's it. I don't know if the late 80s, early 90s was just was a strange era where like the California Raisins could start as like a commercial and then get an animated series. Like, I don't know, but there was something weird going on because I owned a lot of, and maybe because they were cheap and easy to find, I owned
Mm.
a lot of these like platformers that were based on like commercials. Like
Can I
I owned,
try? Can I
yeah,
say,
please.
and okay, because this will also be like a fun test in my memory. Yo Noid,
From
did you have
Domino's.
from Domino's? Yeah. Did you have that one?
No, I didn't have that one.
Okay. How about Seven Up Cool Spot?
I absolutely had the Cool Spot game for the Super Nintendo.
Okay, and then there's like a Ronald McDonald one, or it's like a McDonald's Kids on the
I
NES.
didn't I didn't have that one.
Okay.
The other one that I had that like really sticks out to me was the Crash Test Dummies game for the Super Nintendo.
Sure.
And the fact that because the Crash Test Dummies were, I don't know, oddly popular. They were from like a public service announcement campaign
Yeah.
about buckling your seatbelt.
But then they also
And
had like an animated series, right?
right, yeah, like, and clearly like video games. Like I don't know why, but it was an era, cuz I mean, let me describe for you the Cool Spot like video game. This is the anthropomorphication of the red dot on the 7 Up can logo.
Yeah,
And
Mark, great point. Thank you for even bringing us back to that, because it was something I was prepared to blow past. I bet 7-Up hasn't used that as a character in 20 years.
oh, for sure. But it was more than just a dot. It was a very early 90s radical dot. And so the dot had like very like loose the dot basically walks like Jar Jar Binks. It wears sunglasses. A lot of the game takes place on like the beach or on a yacht, or like in a marina where there's lots of yachts. Like it's very it's what is that Beach Boys faux Beach Boys song uh Kokomo. It's very like that sort
Yes.
of like Kokomo vibe, where it's like, I don't know if these people have ever been to the Caribbean, but they sure like can check all the boxes on the
beach stereotype list.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, and even the Beach Boys at their Beach Boysiest didn't surf, so and it was just a total lie to sell the California lifestyle.
So you're running around as like the little red dot with sunglasses, and you're trying to get cool points. Each level you have to collect like a certain amount. Like get 30 cool points, and as you collect the points, your cool percentage goes up until you're trying to hit like 100%. But like the levels are really kind of like crazy. Like they're big and vertical, and so you get like 60. You get like not 60, but 6 minutes to collect these like 30 cool points, which is a absurdly long amount of time.
What was it fun?
No.
Okay.
The Crash Test Dummies game was actually like kind of fun, because it was just an action platformer. So you were a crash test dummy, but you had like wrenches and stuff that you could throw, and you're going through all these like factory like levels and stuff like that. So it was, I guess, actually probably the 7-Up Cool Spot game was more correct to what the 7-Up Cool Spot would be than like the Crash Test Dummies, who, as far as I could tell, were not really action heroes.
I'm doing a little research right now on the fly about that McDonald's kids game that I was alluding to earlier. It's called MC Kids or Mick Kids. It is not clear. The box art for this thing. Everyone go right now and look up MC Kids. The box art. It says M period C and then under it kids. So there's not even a period after the C. It's very confusing. But this was a like side-scrolling like platform adventure-y game where you played as like two kids in McDonald's land. I played this game like a very little bit, like maybe rented it one time. This game is notable for me and for my list of licensed games here, in that it came out in 1992. Mark, would it surprise you to know that virtually every game I want to talk about today came out in 1992 or 1993?
No, that's the sweet spot.
But we can toss MC Kids aside. But I just wanted to bring it up as in line with what you're talking about there with Crash Test Dummies and the Cool Spot. Do you think there is like is there an equivalent of that now? Like, are there commercials made into video games outside of like the Burger King Sneak King on the original Xbox?
That was the only one I could think of when I was trying to think of like modern day equivalents, and I don't think so. But I also wonder if it's just kind of like it hit at this time in just like American culture in general, right? Where we had just gone through deregulation of a bunch of industries. And so just like you saw with children's television, where it was like, oh, G.I. Joe and Transformers, where it's like, these are just straight up toy commercials. They don't have like any educational content. That same sort of thing is like bleeding over into video games, where it's like, hey, this is this console boom of the late 80s, early 90s is like a new thing, and we're all just kind of like cashing in on this very specific like children's demographic, which I feel like video games are not as focused anymore on that like like 12 and under set like it was in the 80s.
I also think there's probably, and all of this I think comes with the caveat of like, but you can probably find it on mobile. but I don't think there's as much of we were a lot closer to having like a sort of monoculture in the 90s, where even if not everyone is watching all TV shows and movies, which for the most part they were, that like the commercials were still largely the same, so something like the 7 Up Cool Spot could have that everyone is familiar with that character. Everyone is familiar with the Crash Test Dummies, which now sounds insane, of course. But like, what is the equivalent in 2020? Like the Geico Gecko flow? Like,
yeah, actually, that's probably like yeah, and which I think you're right that there probably is like a flow, like
Yeah,
Progressive
totally.
Auto Insurance, like mobile game at some point. Remarkable that we never got a Joe Camel licensed game.
Oh man, I wish someone would make that now in like NES or Super NES fashion. That'd be great.
Graphics.
So Mark, I'm going to bring us to 1992, as I will keep pulling us back to 1992 throughout this episode. I want to talk about Tiny Toons Cartoon Workshop. Is this a game you are familiar with?
No, but I had a different.
Yeah, you
Tiny
probably had
Toons
Tiny
game.
Toon Adventures on the NES, which came out in 1991, which is like a side-scrolling platform game where you switch between like three of the main Tiny Toons. I had that game. I love that game. I was very much into the Tiny Toons as a concept, because like for me the Looney Tunes were something that are like kind of pre-verbal for me. Like I've always been aware of them. I've always liked those cartoons. And then I was old enough when Tiny Toon Adventures first came on, to like be like drawing the lines between like these characters and their mentors on the series, and like seeing how they were different, and like so I was just into it enough to like understand what was happening. And Tiny Toons Cartoon Workshop, which again comes out in 1992, is a sort of educational, edutainment style game wherein you can you make your own Tiny Toons cartoons, by selecting like little animation cycles of a couple of the different characters and placing them on a background. And you can change like what animation cycle an individual character has. So like, for example, you'll have what's the coyote's name? Calamity Coyote, and Little Beeper. They're like Roadrunner and Coyote analogs, and they have like a running animation, like running into something animation, a fall animation. You can like kind of like chart them on these paths and like build these kind of complicated cartoon scenes, and the whole thing is like insane because like you can't save anything, and there's maybe like 4 minutes of cartoon that you can make at any given time. There, the techniques are limited, so you can only do really so much stuff. But it was just so much fun to mess around with it and try to make it make a cartoon.
Yeah, that's a really cool concept. I'd never heard of that game before. When you're describing those restrictions,
Yeah.
it actually reminds me a lot of like the restrictions we ran into when we played Wii Music.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but this Wii Music always wants you to do a specific thing, right? Like, it wants you to like play a song. And I would say that this gave you, well, it had a ton of restrictions. It was still very, very open, and you had like this toolbox to do whatever you wanted. And sure, the tools could only accomplish so much, but like it felt limitless to me as a 10-year-old kid, right? And it came out 2 weeks after Mario Paint, right? And again, this is an NES game, so like a late NES game, well into the Super Nintendo's life cycle. And like those two things for me, like I just spent so much time making little cartoons in them and like recording them onto the VCR and all that stuff. So I'm sure there are tapes and tapes of my bad Tiny Toons cartoons and Mario Paint cartoons. But like it was just weird to me that like those sorts of tools didn't exist on the machines that I was playing, in any other form except for these two games.
Yeah, I mean the Tiny Toons game is such a interesting concept. Like I wish like if I had had it as a kid, I would have loved that because I was so interested in like animation and like creating like films and stuff like that, then having something like that where I would be able to take these characters I like and make them like do things in my own creation is such a fun idea.
Yeah, and like it was funny too. Like they did a good job of like making the animations where the coyote like runs into a cactus and like slides down, like that they're all like timed out and funny, and like all you gotta do is kind of like plug them in and you're having a good time.
Well, I want to take us 10 years later
Whoa!
to 2002
Okay.
because so one of the games on GameCube, licensed games that I played a lot, was Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. And I feel like this also belongs to a type of licensed game that I want to say doesn't get made that much anymore, or at least I'm not aware of, but were very prevalent at this time, which was basically like, we're going to tell the story of the movie and then kind of like try to meld that with an action game. And this game for me has like such a strong presence in my mind because it is peak like GameCube graphics and like GameCube aesthetic and GameCube music, where everything's a little bit like plasticine. It toes the line between being realistic and cartoony.
Yeah.
The characters look like enough like the characters in the movie that you're like, ah, yes, this is like a world that I'm familiar with, but different enough that they don't have to pay anybody for their likenesses. And then it has like the very, typical, I guess what I would say, like the gameplay is fine, right? Like it's not a bad game, but it's very typical. Like the puzzles, like the movement is very slow and puzzle solving is very slow, and like having to grab things and do things, everything takes like a little bit more effort. It like lacks the polish of like a really like big budget game, but it's like it's totally good. It actually reminds me a lot of the Samurai Jack Battle Through Time game that came out for Switch and other platforms just a couple of months ago, and where it's like this Harry Potter game was full priced at the time, but now like could absolutely be released and be like a budget title. Like if it's right in that mold of like, this is good enough for $30, but like doesn't meet that like $60 standard. I guess.
That's such an interesting phenomenon of like we need to make a video game of this movie. Let's just try to like tell the story of the movie and insert gameplay. I feel like 2002 is when this was. I feel like that's maybe like just around the same era that they started doing things like Enter the Matrix, where it's like it exists in that movie universe, but it's like a different story. Same thing with and you mentioning the sort of like plasticine, not quite real, not quite cartoony. The Ghostbusters game that had two different art styles because they had to also release it on Wii at the same time that they put it on like the more powerful platforms. It's such an interesting phenomenon of like, no, we can like eventually make another movie. It's like doing what you're describing, except the movie doesn't exist.
Yeah, which makes a lot of sense. I mean, basically, I think one of the reasons why like licensed games are so appealing, no matter where on like the AAA spectrum they land, is because of if you get a good license, it's just a world that people want to spend more time in, right? So like the Chamber of Secrets game, it didn't really matter that it was a Chamber of Secrets game. It could have been any of the movies. It could have been none of the movies. It was being able to like hang out in the world and with those characters that you like so much. And so that's where I feel like the dividing line between a good licensed game and a bad licensed game is. I don't even know that it's necessarily, like the quality of the gameplay. If I just don't know how much it always matters, because like sometimes it's just about like, is it good because I get to spend more time in a world and with characters that I like? And that's why I think like a game like Cool Spot or like Crash Test Dummies, no matter what, wasn't going to stand the test of time because
who cares about those characters?
Right. And you know, like sometimes it goes the other way where like, let's talk it's not on my list, but like DuckTales for the NES, right? Like there
Sure.
are other Capcom licensed games for the NES that also came from like those Disney afternoon cartoons, like the Chippendale Rescue Rangers one that I played way more than DuckTales, but that one hasn't persisted in the same way that like DuckTales has.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting. I set myself a little rule when making this list, and I didn't share this rule with you. So, but my rule was I'm not going to talk about anything that is obviously Disney. So like even though like you say there are those two Capcom Disney games, the Mickey Mouse Capades, the Lion King, Aladdin. Obviously they're like a lot kind of right all in the same era, late '80s, early '90s. That like aren't they succeed probably most at just presenting you with these ideas again, or with like the characters and the settings and stuff. And I would say that like DuckTales is a huge exception to that, where it invented a style of gameplay, um this like bouncing on the pogo stick thing, that then became like the cornerstone for Shovel Knight, as it like comes back as a retro thing. um it's just neat that there's like such a foundational aspect to it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And kind of pivoting on the idea of a licensed game having the sort of like foundational effect. We talked about one of these games last week, but I want to talk about the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle games that came out on NES and Super NES, just sort of as a blanket thing. And specifically three games I want to shout out. One is the original TMNT on the NES, which came out in 1989. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3: The Manhattan Project, which came out in 1992, and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Tournament Fighter, which came out on the Super NES in 1993. And then there was also an NES version in 1994, if you can believe that. But so the original Ninja Turtles game is a hard, like punishing, obtuse game where like there are mechanics in that game I still don't rightly understand 31 years later. And like the platforming is so finicky and all of that. But as a Ninja Turtles fan, the cartoon started airing in '87, so I would have been aware of it by the time this game came out. That like I just like spending time with the turtles. But it's I think that like the game that Konami made isn't like is not really connected to any Ninja Turtle stories or anything like that. Like they use some of the characters and then just like go crazy because like there's like a man made out of fire that like separates as you hit him. There are like the enemies in that game are like absolutely wild, and like you cannot trace their origin back to any comic or cartoon or whatever. The movies didn't exist at this point. But the thing that always stands out to me, and I don't think I hear anyone talk about it in video game circles or in Ninja Turtle circles, and I am present in both, is the fact that this dam level, the level where you have to like swim through and like disarm all these bombs, is just like a concept invented for this game. Like there's never a dam that's under attack in any early turtle stuff. Like they just made up this thing because they're like, what do turtles do? They swim. And it becomes this like additive thing of like, okay, is that part of what the turtles do now? There's something very interesting, and Turtles is a very specific case because it is such a like has such a permeable membrane around like what it is, because there's so much invention coming from so many different media at the exact same time. Comics, TV shows, movies, games, and they all just sort of become one totally non-cohesive object. Is one of the things that I love about the Ninja Turtles. But like you can really see it coming from like far afield in this first Turtles game.
Now, is one of the turtles, and actually maybe multiple of them have this same sort of convention, but like you're driving around in the van and then you get out and like go into a manhole cover, and then that's when it's almost like a Zelda 2 type thing where it's like the overworld is one thing, and then and then it becomes like side scrolling when you actually like get into the level.
Yeah, that's just the first one. So the sequel on the NES was really just a port of the arcade game, which is more of a like classic Konami like Final Fight-esque like beat 'em up kind of game. And the port to the NES was awful. It looks terrible. And they made a sequel to that, which is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3, which was never an arcade game, and that's called the Manhattan Project, and that's actually a pretty good beat 'em up style game on the NES. But like that's another one where like there are characters from that like come out of characters and concepts that like come out of nowhere and are just like, can they be part of like Ninja Turtles lore now? Like, yeah, sure they can.
That's really funny. Well, the reason I was asking about like the Ninja Turtles game was kind of a leading question because one of the games that I played as a kid, I remember renting it from like the local video store just because I was obsessed with two things at the time. It was Captain EO from Disneyland and Star Wars. And so we got the Star Wars NES game from like the local video store.
Yeah.
And that I found that game so confounding. I never got off Tatooine, which takes up maybe about like half of the game's runtime if you go like watch a playthrough of it now. Because it was the same sort of thing where you would be on Luke's land speeder and you would be you would have to go to like different like caves on Tatooine, and then once you got into the caves it was like a side-scrolling type thing where you're blasting away Jawas.
Yeah, that's interesting because the Ghostbusters game is like that too, right?
Yeah, I feel like it's just like the way action games were set up.
Yeah, that's so weird.
But then you get off of Tatooine and that convention goes away entirely, and there are like dogfights and a whole bunch of different stuff. But the other reason I like or that Star Wars game is so melded into my mind is because they like A New Hope, there is action in that movie, but there is not like persistent action. Yeah. And so to make like a Star Wars video game that is based on A New Hope, you are killing so many people. Like there are so like everything is an action sequence. The cantina is an action sequence. Like everything is just like enemies coming at you. There's a ton of Greedos. You're blowing them all away. And of course that would like carry over into like the Super Star Wars games as well,
where Super it's just, Star Wars games.
Every like the world of Star Wars becomes so hostile where everything is attacking you all the time.
Yeah, and you gotta do like a whole level as Slave Leia, and you're like, wow, she is murdering a ton of people. And then like Wicket is like the planet Endor is like the most hostile place you could ever be. Monsters to kill everywhere. Did you have more that you want to talk about, or it was Star Wars? We could talk Star Wars games for a little bit and how like they're important to Nintendo consoles.
Yeah, I mean there were a lot of them. Probably I don't know if you have this on, but like Shadows of the Empire. I don't know if that's on your list, but that for the N64 was an N64 exclusive and was a big deal. It was like a multimedia event. There was a video game, there were books, there was an album, there were comics, and it like they all kind of told the same story of Dash Rendar, a basically Han Solo by another name.
That's right. Well, Han Solo's frozen in carbonite during this time, so like we right. need a new Han Solo, which is very funny to me. Yeah, I think it's interesting that the Nintendo 64 like launched / not quite launched. I don't know if GoldenEye was a launch game or not, but that like there are these two big licensed games sort of like acting as anchors for that system in Shadows of the Empire and GoldenEye 007, like that they're both so reliant on like very close, very like cinematic presentations of these IP. I guess I don't really have too much more to say about like either of those games because I don't think either of them are very good. GoldenEye holds a special place for a lot of people for its 4-player like deathmatch or arena stuff, and I remember playing a ton of that too, alternating between that and Mario Kart. But like now the game is virtually unplayable,
like so many N64 games.
Now that is true. And then there was also the Episode 1 Racer, originally just a Nintendo 64 game as well. It's what I mean. I guess Star Wars video games end up in sort of like a weird place the last 2 decades anyway. But it's I wish they could go back to having a like relationship with Nintendo. Like I would like more Nintendo Star Wars games.
Yeah, and like we've talked about before, Star Wars during that era was very different from Star Wars now, where there's like 9 movies,
Yeah.
tons of different like timelines and eras within Star Wars that you can go to. It was like there was essentially just the 3 movies, and everything kind of revolved around those 3 movies. So to see how like, Shadows of the Empire like weaves itself in and out, so it's like, well, it can still happen, and it doesn't really, negate anything that happened after Empire Strikes Back. It's a lot of fun going back when Star Wars was so much more like constricted.
Well, it's also funny because like that was when, like everything that is Star Wars now is either canon or Legends, right? Like Legends is the stuff before Disney bought it, and canon is like everything else, and everything else has to fit into canon. And at the time, like Lucasfilm and like the people who were maintaining like Wikipedia, had like varying levels of canon, and so they would be like, this thing is assumed to be true unless it's contradicted by something that is more canon than it, which is just so funny to have like these varying levels of like,
I think there were like 6 or something.
yeah, it's outrageous. Mark, again, can I take us back to 1993 this time?
Please.
This is a Super NES game that is based on my favorite movie from 1993. I'm referring, of course, to Jurassic Park. Did you ever play Jurassic Park on the Super NES?
At my friend's house, yeah.
So this game has a little bit of the thing that you were describing in you're on like an overworld map and then you go in and it's like a side-scrolling thing, except instead of side-scrolling, it is a first-person, this is on the Super NES, a first-person like slow Doom like game, except like it's so slow and like it is rendering these 3D these 3D environments. First of all, when you go into buildings, you are wearing the night vision goggles because all the power is out, which is a fun little framing device. Literally a framing device because it shrinks the side, like the view field, into maybe like half the screen.
Wow.
So because that's all that it could render, right, at any given time. And those first person sections are impossible. They are so hard and so confusing. You get lost all the time. And like the main mechanic of when you're in those areas is finding ID cards and using the ID cards to like swipe into open doors to get into new places. And like you're basically playing out like the plot of the book / the movie. There's one point where you have to like trap the raptors on a ship that you then like send out or stop from going out. I don't remember. Game is incredibly hard, very long. And like the overhead exploration segments are action packed as well. You can be chased by any of the dinosaurs, including a T-Rex, which kind of just comes out of nowhere unannounced and murders you. Your basic weapon is a cattle prod, which is no good for stopping anyone, except for those tiny little Compsognathus dinosaurs. This game, brutal, very hard. No save feature or password feature, so you had to beat it. You had to beat it all in one go. This is a game that I think my buddy Pete and I beat once. I think we beat it once at my family's condo up in northern Wisconsin during some weekend where I'm sure we should have been playing outside. But instead we stayed inside and played Jurassic Park all the way through to the end.
On the Super Nintendo, no excuse for not having at least a password save system.
It's outrageous. Here's another amazing fact about this game. It was developed by Ocean, the company that would later make Waterworld on the Virtual Boy.
It always comes back to the Virtual
Always
Boy,
does.
full circle.
But I this is a game that I actually really, really liked. Or I at least played a ton of. I don't know if I liked it. I think about
When
it
you're
all
a
the
kid,
time.
there's no real distinction.
Great point.
Yeah.
Great point.
Well, the last game that I wanted to talk about was Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade for the Nintendo Entertainment System. This one is one of my favorites in my memory. I actually don't think it's that fun to play, but the reason I liked it so much is it had like not even really cutscenes. They're just like bitmap images from the movie.
Perfect.
And then, with like text explaining what you're supposed to be doing next or like what part in the story you are. And like the gameplay itself, there's different modes. So sometimes like during the climax of the game, when it's following the climax of the movie, it's like little like puzzle mini games where you have to, you're trying to walk on the floor and you're making sure you're spelling the right thing, like all that kind of stuff. But it's kind of like it hits the nostalgia like sweet spot for me where it's like, oh yeah, this is like a movie, like a license I love.
Yeah.
And as a kid, just like banging my head against the wall, like dying so many times, not being able to figure out how I was supposed to control Indiana Jones or, like what the objective actually was, but just being able to exist in the world of a movie I like so much and having like actual images, albeit like the low quality, like bitmap images, like from the film itself when I didn't own them on VHS or anything, like felt like such a special, like magical thing. And I kind of think that's like the best of these like licensed games. Like I feel like licensed games now are very different a lot of times. Like I know we're disqualifying it, but like those Batman Arkham Knight games are just like on a totally different like scale and level of like quality than anything like the games I grew up playing that were based on the movies I love. But it's just like the ability to exist in the world with those characters is always so much fun.
Yeah, and I mean honestly though, like that is something that the good versions of these licensed games are still doing, right? Like one of the great joys of especially those first two Arkham games is that it feels like you are in Gotham. It feels like you are in Arkham Asylum. You are seeing characters that you know everywhere. You're hearing the voices of Kevin Conroy and Mark Hamill as Batman and the Joker. Like, it's just you are immediately spending time in that universe. Not a Nintendo game, and I'll keep bringing it up, I guess, forever. But like Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order felt like Star Wars, and it felt like you were playing or like existing in that universe as a Jedi character, and like going to planets that and all that stuff. Just it goes such a long way towards feeling like you're engaging with the movies or TV shows or whatever that you really love.
Yeah, it's weird. Like I would really love a Indiana Jones video game, like a modern like Indiana Jones action game.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about
like
this. Have you played the Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis?
That's the point and click adventure game, right?
Yeah.
No, I haven't. But do you remember back? I mean, at this point, it may be close to 10 years, but that there was a demo for a modern like Indiana Jones action game that I think was like discussed or shown off around E3. Those running on like Unreal Engine 3 or something like that.
Yeah.
And it never came to be. And look, I know that like the Uncharted games exist. Like I feel like there are like analogs out there that try to give you that same like experience, but not with those characters. But there's something that is just a little bit, it would just be exciting about actually existing like a new like Indiana Jones story itself.
Man, God, Indiana Jones is in such an interesting place, and like I don't know. Well, I mean, maybe they're just biding their time, but like it's interesting to me that like Disney doesn't appear to be making any moves with it, right? Like we don't know of like. Well, go ahead.
We do. So, like, Spielberg was supposed to direct one.
Oh, yes, that's right.
They were supposed to start filming earlier this year, and then he dropped out, and James Mangold came on board, and technically, I think is still attached, but like, Harrison Ford isn't getting any younger, and so with the coronavirus, I don't know if it'll actually move forward. It might end up being one of those like Hollywood what ifs. Yeah. But like they were actively trying to make one for next year.
But I'm just saying, we've had 5 Star Wars movies, 4 seasons of Rebels, 2 seasons of Mandalorian, like a couple Star Wars video games since Disney bought Lucasfilm, and like and a ton of comics and a ton of books, and like Indiana Jones, nothing. What is happening?
Bring back the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles, you
Bring
cowards.
Bring back the Young Indiana Jones. Make a movie out of this Fate of Atlantis. I don't know what it is. Mark, can I share a disappointment? A licensed game disappointment.
I wish you would.
So my buddy Chris and I, when we were wee lads, saw the Alien vs. Predator Super NES game and rented it, and were excited to play what we thought would be a fun Alien game or a fun Predator game. Both movies that, we shouldn't have seen at that time, as we would have been like 11 or 12. Clearly too young to have seen these movies, though I know we did. And I remember having seen the Alien vs. Predator arcade game, and being like, that game looks cool. That's exciting. Here's the Super NES version. Let's play it. And they're similar games in that they're both like side-scrolling, Final Fight style beat 'em ups. But Alien vs. Predator on the Super NES is developed by a company named Jorudan, and it is it doesn't look great. It doesn't play great. It's slow. It's clumsy. Whereas the Alien vs. Predator arcade game is made by Capcom, like the king masters of side-scrolling, beat 'em up style games in the arcade in the mid 90s. Alien vs. Predator the arcade game is one that like I hold in like high esteem. If I ever see it in an arcade anywhere, I'm gonna pick it up. It is never on any of their like beat 'em up collections. I guess it's gonna be part of that. Remember that big like standalone arcade thing that just looked like has the name Capcom in it and like 2 arcade sticks and like maybe a dozen games or something like that. It's in that collection, which is awesome and makes it something that I'm like interested in, but also like just port that to Switch, guys. Come on. But yeah, Alien vs. Predator for me was something that I like. I always want Alien vs. Predator to be good, and it simply never is. But this was one of those like early harsh lessons in like, yeah, no, it's really not any good. All right, we've been through a bunch of licensed games, and I guess, look, I know I said I was going to try to not talk about Disney stuff, but we've talked about Star Wars a bunch, so I just want to bring it up one more time before we get out of here. The Lego Star Wars Skywalker Saga, coming out at some point next year, was originally slated to come out this year, but this year is this year. Mark, where are you like excitement wise on that game?
I'm looking forward to it. Everything that we've seen about it, like I haven't played a Lego game for a while. It's probably been like 10 years since I really played one all the way through, and I enjoyed those. But this seems like for somebody who's been out of the Lego games for a long time, like this seems like a real evolution on the series, and the chance to go through all 9 stories in like the Skywalker saga is really exciting, really appealing.
Yeah. It's one that I'm very much looking forward to, especially because I really liked the Lego Star Wars Force Awakens game. I thought it was very good, and more kind of like dynamic and less like mindlessly plugging away like a lot of the Lego games are, especially the Lego Star Wars games. And then there wasn't a Last Jedi or Rise of Skywalker game. So yeah, bring it on. Whoa, what am I saying? I want more Star Wars. So yeah, I guess I'll shut up.
I mean, Yaddle is a playable character.
Yaddle!
This is important to me.
It's important to all of us, Mark. All right, let's close this up. Did we miss any big licensed games on Nintendo platforms? I didn't talk about Fester's Quest. I thought I was going to talk about Fester's Quest. I did not. Do you ever play Fester's Quest, Mark?
No, I never played Fester's Quest. I know it's notoriously bad. Same with think of all the Simpsons games that we didn't talk
yeah.
about,
So many Simpsons
of
games.
also varying quality.
A lot of these games, Ninja Turtles, Simpsons, Batman, also wound up on Game Boy. All those games are almost unplayable. They're so bad. But please, if we left anything out or anything that you want to bring up, please email us at nintendocartridgesociety@gmail.com. Or tweet at us at NinCartSociety. All right, that's going to do it for this episode of Nintendo Cartridge Society. Remember, please rate, review, subscribe on Apple Podcasts. If you like the episode, share it wherever you share stuff. That helps us out a bunch. You can follow us on Twitter. I'm at Patrick_Ellers. Mark is at MKE Mitchell. And as I just mentioned, the show is at NinCart Society. We also have a Facebook page, which is Nintendo Cartridge Society. Olivia Duncan made our logo. Our theme music is provided by 8-Bit Betty. You can get more of his music by going to 8bitbetty.com or by listening right now. For my co-host, Mark Mitchell, this is Patrick Ellers saying, why isn't Alien vs. Predator ever any good? It should be. Thanks for listening.
Hi, I'm Michelle Varay.
And I'm Kimberly Trung, and we are the host of Crush Fictionally, a podcast all about your favorite fictional characters from movies, TV shows, and more.
Each episode, we pick a theme, curate a list of characters that we love, why we love them, and some fun facts about the people who created them.
So if you've ever felt a true connection with a fictional character,
tune in to Crush Fictionally on Campfire Media.
Or wherever you find your podcast.
Campfire.